You don't know anything about voter fraud, but you're commenting on voter fraud. But you're not a publisher, you're a platform. Oh, okay. The tech tyrants were up on Capitol Hill yesterday. Actually, it was remote hearing up on Capitol Hill. And we had Mark Zuckerberg from Fakebook and Jack Dorsey, one of the Twitter tech tyrants over there. And it reminded me of Al Pacino. Years ago, I would have taken a blowtorch. But Paula loved Al Pacino. Remember that was a great moment. What was that? Scent of a Woman? I may be nailing some of these things, which is a shocker. That you know me, I always get the movie wrong. But Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, and Mike Lee took a blowtorch to these guys as they acted like total buffoons up there. Their statements were ridiculous. And Senator Cruz burned these statements right to the ground. So here's video of Senator Ted Cruz yesterday asking Mr. Jack Dorsey from Twitter that if they're going to label tweets about concerns about voter fraud, perfectly legitimate concerns on their platform, by the way, voter fraud is very real and it exists. The degree of it you can fairly dispute. That it exists, you'd be a moron to suggest it doesn't. I'm not kidding. A moron or a liar. So Senator Cruz asked Jack Dorsey the obvious question. Well, if you're on your platform labeling tweets about suspected voter fraud, putting little disclaimers on them, that must mean, right, Joe? Twitter, you're an expert in voter fraud. Would it not? Sounds clear,
probably,
right?
Yeah.
If you go I mean, if you were to come into a debate back and forth and you were debating voter fraud and Jack Dorsey raised his hands and censored everything the Republicans said in the middle of the debate before the Democrats spoke, you would assume Jack Dorsey knew more than the debaters, right? So Ted Cruz gets Jack Dorsey on the record. And Jack Dorsey says, yeah, absolutely. You know, I know everything about voter fraud. I've studied this issue. Actually, he doesn't say any of that. He says he basically doesn't know jack squat about voter fraud, but he's decided to inject himself in the debate anyway. Check this out.
Mr. Dorsey, does voter fraud exist?
I don't know for certain.
Are you an expert in voter fraud?
No, I'm not.
Well, why then is Twitter right now putting purported warnings on virtually any statement about voter fraud?
We're simply linking to a broader conversation so that people have more information.
No, you're not. You put up a page that says, quote, voter fraud of any kind is exceedingly rare in the United States. That's not linking to a broader conversation. That's taking a disputed policy position. And you're a publisher when you're doing that. You're entitled to take a policy position, but you don't get to pretend you're not a publisher and get a special benefit under Section 230 as a result.
That link is pointing to a broader conversation with tweets from publishers and people all around the country.
Mr. Dorsey, would the following statement violate Twitter's policies? Quote, absentee ballots remain the largest source of potential voter fraud.
I imagine that we would label it so that people can have more context in read through.
How about this quote? Quote, third-party organizations, candidates, and political activists, voter fraud is particularly possible where, quote, third-party organizations, candidates, and political party activists are involved in, quote, handling absentee ballots. Would you flag that as potentially misleading?
I don't know the specifics of how we might enforce that, but I imagine a lot of these would have a label pointing people to a bigger conversation.
Well, you're right. You would label them because you've taken the political position right now that voter fraud doesn't exist. I would note both of those quotes come from the Carter-Baker Commission on Federal Election Reform. That is Democratic President Jimmy Carter and former Secretary of State James Baker. And Twitter's position is essentially voter fraud does not exist.
Forgive me. I always get the pop culture. I did not even look. I just remember. You take a flamethrower to this place. That's the line, right? Not blowtorch. You take a flamethrower. There's Ted Cruz totally blowtorching Jack Dorsey's stupidity. So just to be clear, Jack Dorsey's decided through Twitter to label posts on voter fraud, which we know exists. Again, the degree of it can be disputed. Jack Dorsey admits he's not an expert on voter fraud. Matter of fact, doesn't claim to know anything about voter fraud at all. Did I miss that? Paula, did I miss that? Did he go into at length his studies on voter fraud? Joe, did you cut that out? You messing with the show again?
Mm-hmm. No,
you didn't. Okay, no. Joe, it's an affirmative no from Joe. So he did not cut out the part where Jack Dorsey says he knows anything about voter fraud at all.
No.
So he doesn't. But he's labeling voter fraud posts, labeling on Twitter, disclaimers, be very careful, ladies and gentlemen. This could be a fake. This could be misleading. How do you know that, Jack? I don't know. I don't know anything about voter fraud. If this is puzzling you, it's kind of puzzling me too. You don't know anything about voter fraud, but you're commenting on voter fraud. But you're not a publisher, you're a platform. Oh, okay.
You just heard Dan Bongino.